At 80 years old, Michael Douglas is no longer hiding what he once protected with his silence. For decades, the world saw a glamorous Hollywood marriage, but behind the rehearsed smiles and careful answers, Michael lived through storms few could imagine. He now speaks about the pain, the fear, and the emotional cost of loving Catherine Zeta-Jones while the world treated them as royalty. And the truth he reveals forces a question no one expected: how much suffering can remain invisible inside a marriage the world swore was perfect? The beginning he never forgot. Michael Douglas always said that his life changed in 1998, long before anyone suspected the darkness that would later take root in his marriage. He first saw Catherine Zeta-Jones on screen in The Mask of Zorro while recovering from back surgery and trying to pull himself out of habits and addictions that had quietly shaped the previous decade of his life. At 54, he was a man entering the final stretch of midlife, accomplished, yes, but also bruised by divorce, tabloid scandals, and the constant pressure of being Kirk Douglas's son. He knew success intimately, but inner peace eluded him. And when he saw Catherine on that screen, something shifted. She was 29, radiant, sharp, full of promise, everything he feared he no longer was. When he met her at the Deauville Film Festival in France later that year, he carried both charm and insecurity into the room. He tried to impress her, speaking boldly, masking fear with bravado. "I will be the father of your children," he said, a line meant to be playful, memorable, unforgettable. Catherine's response was none of those things. She dismissed him politely but firmly, leaving him with a sting of humiliation he had not felt in years. To Michael, that moment felt like the first tiny crack in a story he hoped would be perfect, a reminder that she was not a woman he could bend with confidence or status. But Michael Douglas was not a man who surrendered easily, especially when something or someone touched him that deeply. When Catherine left to film Entrapment in Scotland, he arranged for roses to be delivered to her hotel. She kept the card attached to that bouquet for more than 20 years, a silent symbol of a turning point, the moment she allowed herself to see him not as a Hollywood stereotype, but as a man trying desperately to begin again. By December 1999, they were engaged. 8 months later, in August 2000, their son Dylan was born. And that November, they stood together in the Plaza Hotel, surrounded by Tom Hanks, Steven Spielberg, Anthony Hopkins, and dozens of Hollywood names, exchanging vows that looked like the beginning of a fairy tale. Catherine wore a gown by David Emanuel. Their infant son was carried down the aisle. The world saw glamour, destiny, perfection. But beneath the glow, Michael sensed something else, shadows forming quietly around the edges. Catherine's career exploded. She won an Oscar in 2003 while pregnant with their daughter Karis. She was ascending, unstoppable, magnetic. Michael, older and increasingly aware of his limitations, felt pride but also a quiet fear. He tried to keep pace, but age was already whispering the truth he didn't want to hear. Those first years were filled with love, success, and extraordinary milestones. Yet they also planted the earliest seeds of insecurity and imbalance. Looking back, Michael would later admit that even during the happiest days, he felt the weight of a future he wasn't sure he could outrun, a future where he might become too old, too tired, too fragile for the woman he adored. The illness that changed everything. By 2010, the cracks in Michael Douglas and Catherine Zeta-Jones' marriage were no longer invisible. For years, Michael had tried to keep pace with Catherine's momentum, her youth, her rising career, and the magnetic presence that drew the world to her. She was 41 at the height of her power. He was 66, carrying decades of stress, surgeries, addictions, and the increasingly heavy weight of age. He worked hard to seem unshakable, but the gap between them grew wider with every passing year. And then came the moment that changed everything, a doctor quietly telling him he had stage 4 throat cancer. The news crashed through their lives like a hammer. Overnight, Michael went from a man who controlled his world to someone who wasn't sure he would survive the next month, let alone the next decade. He later admitted that the first thought that crossed his mind wasn't fear of death, it was fear of leaving his children fatherless and forcing Catherine to carry their lives alone. But fear doesn't soften the reality of illness. His tumor sat at the base of his tongue, making eating painful, speaking difficult, and breathing a constant effort. The chemotherapy and radiation treatments were as brutal as the diagnosis itself. For Catherine, the change was terrifying. Suddenly, the 25-year age difference that tabloids had mocked for years became painfully real. She watched the strong man she married shrink into someone fragile, exhausted, sometimes incoherent from pain. She slept in chairs beside him, held his hand through endless waves of nausea, and tried to stay composed even when she felt herself falling apart. She didn't have space to break down, not when her husband was fighting for his life, not when the world was watching their every move. Hollywood praised her as the devoted wife, the woman who never left his side. But no one saw the nights when she cried quietly in the bathroom so Michael wouldn't hear her. No one saw the guilt she carried, the fear that she wasn't strong enough for him, the helplessness that ate away at her peace of mind. He needed her, and she gave him everything she had, but the emotional cost was unsustainable. When Michael entered remission in early 2011, the world erupted in applause. He stood on national television announcing he was cancer-free, but Catherine collapsed under the weight of relief. Months of tension, fear, and emotional suppression finally caught up with her. In spring 2011, she entered treatment for bipolar II disorder, revealing a truth she had tried to hide even from herself. She was exhausted, drained, and psychologically fractured. Michael, now physically recovering, faced a painful realization: his illness had taken pieces of Catherine she might never fully regain. While the public saw a miracle recovery, their marriage was quietly bending under the weight of trauma, sacrifice, and the unspoken fear that neither of them would ever be the same again. The separation no one saw coming. By 2012, the illusion of stability had fully dissolved, even if the public still believed in the fairy tale. Catherine Zeta-Jones had entered treatment centers to manage her bipolar II disorder, a condition she had kept hidden for years. She was drained from months of being Michael's emotional backbone during his cancer fight, drained from holding together a household that revolved around survival instead of joy. At the same time, Michael was trying to rebuild the confidence he had lost, not just as a man or an actor, but as a husband who feared he had already put his wife through more pain than she deserved. They were both recovering, just not together. They were healing like two people standing on opposite sides of a broken bridge, each carrying wounds the other was no longer strong enough to soothe. The age gap, long dismissed as tabloid gossip, became an unavoidable truth inside their home. Catherine was in her early 40s, still full of ambition and capability, craving momentum after years of stepping back. Michael, in his late 60s, felt himself slowing down in ways he could no longer hide. His body wasn't as strong. His energy fluctuated. And he feared silently, constantly, that Catherine saw him more as a responsibility than a partner. By 2013, the emotional distance between them had grown into a quiet, cold space neither knew how to cross. And in August of that year, after nearly 13 years of marriage, they separated. No shouting, no dramatic arguments, just two exhausted people acknowledging the truth that had been lingering for too long. Catherine left with the children, needing air, needing clarity, needing to reclaim pieces of herself that had faded during years of caregiving and emotional strain. Michael remained in New York alone for the first time in decades. He returned to the Deauville Film Festival shortly after the separation was announced, the very place where he had first met Catherine in 1998. Those who saw him said he looked thinner, older, as if revisiting that memory only magnified how far he had fallen from the man he once was. In interviews, he avoided blame. "We're working things out," he told people, choosing diplomacy over confession. But friends knew he was grieving, mourning the kind of loss that doesn't come with closure, the loss of hope. Catherine also pretended to be fine. She walked red carpets, smiled for cameras, and gave interviews that suggested stability. But behind the scenes, she was drowning in guilt, exhaustion, and resentment. She had put her career second for years, sacrificed film roles, commitments, and personal dreams because Michael needed her. And now separated, she struggled to reconcile the love she still felt with the emotional damage she could no longer deny. By early 2014, they appeared together again at public events, cautious, polite, almost fragile. fans celebrated what looked like a reunion, but insiders were not convinced. Their return to each other was built on children, nostalgia, and a desire to avoid destroying the family completely rather than on true healing. They moved back into the same home, but Michael later admitted that they returned as different people, shaped and scarred by years of illness, pressure, and emotional sacrifice. The marriage survived the separation, but it survived quietly, limping, held together by effort rather than ease. The years of silence and the truth age couldn't hide. As the years moved forward, Michael Douglas and Catherine Zeta-Jones tried to rebuild a life that had already shown its fractures. They celebrated anniversaries, appeared on red carpets, posted affectionate tributes online, the kind of public gestures Hollywood understands well. But the truth, the one Michael only dared to speak when he turned 80, was far heavier than the smiling photos suggested. Their reconciliation did not erase the damage, it simply covered it. What remained beneath the surface was a marriage that functioned but no longer thrived. Michael aged quickly after his cancer battle. By 2020, even fans noticed he was slower, more withdrawn, more fragile. Catherine, still vibrant at 51, found herself stepping into the role of caretaker once again. But this time, without the adrenaline of crisis to justify the sacrifice, she wanted to travel, to work, to explore new projects, to play golf, and enjoy the vibrant life she had always imagined for her 50s. Michael couldn't keep up. He stayed home, consumed by worry, by the world's chaos, by the quiet fear of becoming irrelevant. According to insiders, Catherine's frustration grew quietly but steadily. She had already paused her career once, now she felt trapped between loyalty and resentment. The whispers became louder in recent years, reports of secret separation, of a quiet division of property, of a marriage maintained more out of habit than love. They sold homes in Bermuda, tried to offload estates in New York and Mallorca, each sale interpreted by those close to them as another sign that the life they built was slowly dissolving. Michael finally admitted privately that the age gap, once a romantic footnote, had transformed into the central conflict of their marriage. He saw himself through Catherine's eyes, slower, weaker, unpredictable in health. And Catherine, despite loving him deeply, was no longer able to ignore her own fading happiness. "I became her responsibility," Michael confessed to a friend, not her partner. He realized the horrifying truth that the woman he loved was losing herself in the process of caring for him, and he had no way to change it. The final confession at 80 years old. At 80, Michael Douglas stopped pretending. For decades, he protected the story the world wanted, the glamorous marriage, the luxury, the red carpets, the perfect photos. But aging has a way of stripping away illusions. And Michael finally confronted the truth he had carried alone for years. He spoke quietly, not with anger but with exhaustion. Loving Catherine Zeta-Jones had been both the greatest gift of his life and the hardest battle he ever fought. He adored her, but he also feared that he had slowly become the reason for her unhappiness. People close to them confirmed what Michael rarely admitted aloud: he felt guilty. Guilty for the 25-year age difference that had shaped every chapter of their relationship. Guilty that his illness had stolen parts of her youth. Guilty that her dreams had been paused without second.